Hey guys, it's Sasha. The US stock market is absolutely exploding this morning, exploding in a good way that is, after the US and China mutually agreed to reduce their tariffs by 115% each. So the US tariff on China will drop from 145 to just 30%, and the Chinese 125% tariff on the US will drop down to 10%. The reason the two are slightly different and not the same is because the US tariff on China is made up of two separate tariffs. There is the original 20% tariff that Donald Trump slapped on China because apparently China is to blame for a load of fentanyl making its way into the United States. That was the official line anyway. And then they added the so-called reciprocal tariff on April 2nd, along with every other country, which eventually went up all the way to 125% for China. So when you add the two together, the 125% and the 20%, you get the 145% total. And the negotiation that just happened in Switzerland was around this new tariff only, so we are now beginning to see a pattern emerge, because the US has now dropped that tariff with China down to 10%. And this is the same 10% as what the US has agreed with the UK. And last week, Donald Trump made multiple statements that 10% is going to be the new baseline tariff for all countries. So it seems that there is no way at all to move that down to zero, even if you are a country with a net surplus from the point of view of the United States in terms of trade. The stock market is celebrating wildly this morning that the tariff on China is down from being 0% 4 months ago to just 30% today. The S&P 500 is up 3% in pre-market trading as I am recording this video, now back to within 5% of the all-time high that was set in February, going up very quickly. Tech stocks are posting huge upswings. Apple is up 7% because Apple manufactures stuff in China, and obviously a 30% tariff is a lot better than a 145% tariff, although a 30% tariff is still actually really quite high. And I think it's really important to just think about it in terms of the absolutes. It's perplexing because everyone is so happy about the fact that the tariff has dropped, but nobody is really thinking about the fact that 30% is still very expensive. And I guess it is good news that, the US and China have actually held talks, have agreed to something. That's probably the real driver of the optimism in the stock market today. But the reality is that the 30% tariff on Chinese imports is apparently going to now be in play for the next 90 days while the US and China continue negotiations. And the thing is, 90 days is a pretty long time. It's 3 times as long as has passed since the original tariffs were introduced and announced by Donald Trump. And while these negotiations are happening, a 30% tariff is apparently going to be the one in play. That's still very significant, and if it stays, there will still be very significant price pressures on goods being imported from China, because if they start moving with the 30% tariff, the price of products in the US will have to go up quite steeply. My guess, I'm just making a rough guess, but my guess here is that the 20% fentanyl tariff is going to be cancelled at some point sooner than the 90-day period, pretty soon, and then the overall tariff will just drop down to the 10%, and that's going to become the new default. A bunch of other countries will, in the process, also sign deals with the US. Sign deals! Big deals! Which will basically all amount to the United States just having a worldwide 10% tariff. Just a 10% duty. The final outcome of this whole long saga with a tariff war, right, is that the US will just have announced a 10% duty on all imports. That's it. That's the summary. But instead of just announcing a flat 10% duty on all imports, they thought it would be more fun to make a big hoo-ha, print big numbers on the cardboard and hold them up, massive tariff announcements first, piss off a whole load of countries and proudly announce that you struck a deal, which just amounts to having a 10% duty on all imports. And that's the summary of the deal. We'll talk about this latest twist in the tariff story and what that means for some of the specific stock segments and where the stock market is heading at the next live session for my course members this Thursday. If you want to get the Investor Playbook course, it is on sale this week only until Sunday night. You can get 10% off the price if you use the code MAYDAY at the checkout. Go to my website, the link is in the description, and just type the code in at the checkout to get it 10% off. The course is all about learning how to become a better investor, how to analyze financial statements, how to value companies, and a lot more. There's live sessions every week. The course starts from first principles. You don't need to have any prior knowledge, and I explain everything from the ground up. So it's really suitable for anyone from people who are relatively new to investing to people who have invested for some time but want to learn some of the maths and finance in more depth. The 10% discount code expires on Sunday night, so if you want to get it, make sure you go and use the coupon Mayday to get your 10% off. Link in the description and in the pinned comment. See you on Thursday. Now, it's quite interesting how positive the stock market is this morning. Tesla shares are up 8% at the moment, even though Tesla does not import any cars to the United States from China or anywhere else. All the cars sold in the US by Tesla are manufactured in the US. They do import some car parts, some raw materials, although on the Q1 update, Tesla said that the battery packs for the Model 3 and Model Y sold in the US are now all manufactured in the US. Palantir shares are up 4%, even though Palantir does precisely zero business with China, and if anything, a more polarized world is actually probably better for Palantir's business model. Robinhood is up 8% because, well, if all stocks are going up and everyone's going nuts for it, I guess it's good business because retail investors only want to buy stocks when they are going up and pushing to all-time highs. Facebook is banned in China, but it's still up 7% today because of China dropping tariffs. Makes perfect sense. The market is jubilant and a rising tide lifts all boats. That's how it often goes with these kind of rallies. The only losers in the stock market today are the big pharma companies, because over the weekend, Donald Trump made a long announcement. I won't read it all because it is quite long. Feel free to go to Truth Social, if you dare, to get the whole thing. But here is the most important bit. Prescription drug and pharmaceutical prices will be reduced almost immediately by 30 to 80%. They will rise throughout the world in order to equalize and for the first time in many years bring fairness to America. I will be instituting a most favored nations policy whereby the United States will pay the same price as the nation that pays the lowest price anywhere in the world. So naturally, while the rest of the stock market is absolutely booming, pharma companies are seeing their stocks go red. And you know what? This is actually, in theory, a very good thing for US consumers, for people who live in the United States. The pharma industry has got to a place where the amounts charged for drugs in the US are absolutely obscene. They charge the money because they can, because there is this disassociation between the pharma companies and the people who actually pay indirectly for it, because there are so many middlemen in the middle and there is no direct connection. And I actually agree with Donald Trump on this one. The reason that is often given for why drug prices are so high in the US because they have to pay for the R&D. It costs so much to develop these drugs, right, that the only way to pay for that development is to then charge a load of money. And the US has a load of money, so people in the US pay more, and other countries would never be able to afford the high prices, would never agree to it, which is why the prices there are lower. In essence, it kind of looks like the US is subsidizing the R&D for the rest of the world. That's how the pharma industry explains it. But while it kind of sounds plausible on the surface, it's not really true. Here is the P&L for Pfizer, for example, maybe the best known pharma company for the most recent quarter. You can see that they made almost $14 billion in revenue in the quarter, but the R&D spend was just $2.2 billion. The marketing budget line just above the R&D one is a lot higher than the R&D spend. And the R&D spend is a really relatively small proportion of the overall revenue, actually commensurate with non-pharma companies in terms of how much it is. Before the Inflation Reduction Act, US pharma companies were getting paid around $60 per vial of insulin that costs, I don't know, what, $2 to produce. The sticker price was around $300 because it's not only the pharma manufacturer that wants to get their share, but all of the middlemen too, the insurance companies, the distributors, the pharmacies and the hospitals, everybody else all wanted their cut too, and the price just got inflated to absolutely absurd levels. Insulin was invented over 100 years ago, not by these pharma companies, and the reason the price on the drug was so stupidly high was not because of having to pay for R&D. It's because the US medical insurance industry is fueled by an absolutely abysmal level of greed and maximizing corporate profits in a space that, you know, maybe should be slightly more regulated because it's to do with people's health, and people not being able to afford their health is not that great for an advanced society. my opinion. So Donald Trump is now saying that anyone selling pharmaceuticals in the US has to sell them at the same price as the cheapest country in which they sell the same drug. And I think the idea here is great. Yeah, Sasha agreeing with Donald Trump. Yeah, I didn't have that on the bingo card. Problem is, I can see two big obvious loopholes here. If you make a drug that you sell in the US for a few $100s that doesn't cost you very much to produce, because, you can, what's stopping you magically stopping selling this precise drug in all the other countries and then selling a almost identical, not quite the same, slightly different drug with some minor differences under a different name in other countries, so that you can then claim that the US drug that you sell is not actually sold in any other market, so there is no other price that you can benchmark against. Now, I am not a pharma expert. My chemistry knowledge is limited by what I studied at school. I did get an A at A level, but that was a long time ago. But I presume there may well be a way to bypass whatever legal definitions are put in place by adjusting the chemistry enough or doing whatever it is that you need to do. And even if that is not possible, the fact is pharma companies make their lion's share of profits on these expensive drugs that are sold in the United States. Now, technically, that is not the case. Technically, these pharma companies are structured in a way where if you look at their 10K forms, you will notice that almost all of their profit is booked outside the United States. Here you can see in the Pfizer's most recent annual filing that apparently Pfizer doesn't make any profit at all in the United States while making huge profits in other countries. They couldn't help but make profit in the US during COVID because money was just flowing so much to these pharma companies. That's why the 2022 profit is positive. But Pfizer does not make a profit in the US in a normal year, despite also making over 60% of their revenue in the US and charging significantly more for exactly the same drugs in the US. That's why you hire accountants who do what they need to do to make sure that your profits happen in countries with low taxes instead of countries where you actually make the money. But anyway, the point is, in the real world, not the world of smart accountants, pharma companies actually make most of their profits in the United States because of the way that the healthcare industry works. And on many of the most profitable drugs, the price difference between what is charged in the US compared to what is charged in other countries is huge. So unfortunately, if the pharma companies cannot game the system and sell slightly different drugs in other countries, they will probably just stop selling those drugs in other countries altogether, where many of the drugs are sold with very low margins so that then they can keep selling it at the huge markups in the US, which is where all the profit is actually made. But let's quickly go back to talking about the China tariffs that made the stock market blow up today. The entire premise of imposing the reciprocal tariffs was apparently to force the countries to make major policy changes, to cancel unfair trade barriers, to open up their markets to US companies. To do all of that, apparently other countries had to somehow magically undo these US trade deficits by buying US goods. In many cases, US goods that they neither need nor can actually afford. And if you remember, the original tariff for China on that board was 34%. And this was, remember, on top of the other 20% tariff. So the total tariff was 54%. So China has done absolutely nothing. They waited a month. They didn't do anything that, would lead to a concession. But the US has now moved the tariff down from 54% in the original board to 30%. While getting zero concessions, zero wins, zero opening of the market, zero, nothing. I thought the art of the deal was to be a powerful strongman so that your negotiating opponent will give you everything that you want because you are so damn badass. But it seems that the actual outcome here is that Donald Trump is now backtracking after realizing that if he does not backtrack, and the insane 145% tariffs on China actually stay, well then the US economy would begin imploding relatively quickly because the data from the reports suggesting that it doesn't look very good. And so 1 month and 10 days after the original announcement, Donald Trump blinked first. and has moved the tariffs down to 30%, which was always the most likely outcome. Backpedaling in one way or another and presenting it as a win was always the most likely outcome. I would guess that the 20% fentanyl tariff will also get undone at some point soon, probably before that 90-day period, and we'll be back to the new standard 10% rate with China so that the US economy can keep going. Not really sure what the point of all the circus was, given that's where it's always going to be ending up, but it's fun to watch the stock market react like a toddler when you tell them you just bought them a nice lolly. Remember, my course is on discount this week only. Go and get yourself the 10% discount by going to my website, sashayanshin.com. You can use the link in the description or in the pinned comment. Use the code MAYDAY, one word, at the checkout to get your 10% discount. Ends on Sunday night. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you later.